Welcome to everyone. I'm François Lemaistre. I'm the Axians Managing Director. Axians being the brand team of Vinci Energies, handling all of the ICT business that we do. And we'll be presenting in 10 to 15 minutes the basics of 5G to all of you with Jérôme Salaun, who's the Axians Deputy for this moment. And first, talking about 5G, I would like to start to talk to you about the old ages, the 1G, the 1980s period, where mobility started. And for some of those who remember that time, we had analog type of communication with an order of magnitude of a kilobit of bandwidth with our devices. Next, in the following decades, in the 1990s, appeared the called 2G. And 2G was a step in the sense that we switched from analog to digital type of communication. And for people, that enabled about a multiplier of 10 in the bandwidth. And it started to enable people to exchange textos and SMS as we'll. At the time, it was also a big mess because there were very different standards from all over the countries, making it very difficult for users to have a worldwide type of communication. And that's why 10 years afterwards, in the years 2000s, appeared what we call the 3G, where standards appeared. And at the time, we had European type of standards and North America type of standards, but it was going towards simplifying the standards to enable a wider experience for the user throughout the planet. At the time also, the appearance of the 3G enabled another multiplier by 10 in terms of bandwidth and the usage of the existing, at the time, smartphones. In the years 2010s, the 4G appeared, next generation. Once again here, multiplying by 10 the bandwidth compared to 3G. And it was the first generation of a worldwide standard for mobile communication, really enabling all users for a simple, straightforward user experience. And 4G has changed in 10 years through what we call long-term evolution, so-called LTE. And now, as we are entering the 20s, of course, a next generation of mobile communication is appearing. We call it 5G, and it's going to be what we're going to tell you about in the basics in the coming 10 minutes. But for you to know, 5G is going to bring another time a multiplier of 10 in terms of bandwidth, and enabling a lot of other new type of use cases compared to the previous 4G. You have to understand this slide that in fact we have had in the past 40 years a continuous improvement of the mobility capacities, technology, and devices. So it's not a sudden change from one generation to another. It's a continuous change from 1G to 5G that has been occurring in the past 40 years. And then at one point, we label the new technologies with a new name. Today, it's going to be 5G. But for you to do, the beginning of the 5G is the end of the 4G. And in 10 years from now, we can expect 6G to appear, 6G being at the start what will be the most of what 5G will be able to provide. Now, let's go to what 5G is. And for you to go back to university, I've been providing you this complicated, sophisticated technical slide just to tell you about the frequency that is being used for the mobile devices. And as you can see in the light blue, mobile devices usually use the bandwidth between 700 megahertz all the way to a few tenths of gigahertz. Now, the previous mobiles, the one that we use today, are more in the 700 megahertz and 3.4, 3.8 gigahertz bandwidth. 4G is starting to get into the 6 gigahertz frequencies, but it's really reaching the limits of what it can do. 5G, as it is going to be appearing now in the world, is clearly addressing all of these frequencies, so the ones from the 700 megahertz all the way to the 4 gigahertz and more. But 5G is already in itself set to be able to work at higher frequencies, the millimeter type of waves, in the several tens of gigahertz. And that, as we will see, is enabling new use cases that even the most updated 4G is not able to provide today. Now, let's get into a little more detail on what 5G is going or is already starting to bring all of us. And the first thing that I'd like to do is compare the latest updated 4G with the very initial 5G as it is provided to us through 3 different and very complementary characteristics. The first one is talking about the bandwidth. And as I told you, you've understood that 4G is going to be thanks to 5G, and 5G is going to be providing times 10 to times 20 the bandwidth of the current 4G through a much better usage of the frequencies and through some usage of high frequencies that are not at the reach of the current 4G. And that should be enabling for everybody, for all of us, to have very high broadband experiences on our mobile devices. Second key change brought by 5G is what we call the latency, so the time of reaction of your devices. For you to know, there is something called the time of transmission. And in the 4G technology, this time of transmission is fixed and it's 1 millisecond. So the latency cannot be below that. And in reality, the latency of 4G is more in the range of 10 milliseconds. As 5G is coming up, this latency not only is going to be improved and lowered in an order of magnitude of divided by 10 divided by 20, but you are also going to be able to change this time of transmission, so you can tune it. It's not fixed anymore. And that is going to bring to the users a latency divided by 10 to the order of magnitude of 1 millisecond, and for some special usage, even below that. And that, for real, we'll talk about it later on, is enabling new use cases such as autonomous cars or be able to remote manage a machine, for example. Third big change brought by 5G is the ability to connect more devices per square kilometer. Just to give you an order of magnitude, 5G is going to multiply by 10 the number of mobiles that are going to be connected per square kilometers, and the order is about 1 million for 5G per square kilometer through something that is called beamforming. So it's the principle of an antenna being able to specifically target each devices rather than illuminating all of the environment and in that environment identifying where the devices are. 5G is going to be able to specifically illuminate the devices and save the energy and save the power for the areas where there are no devices. And that principle is going to drastically improve the number of devices you can be handling with 5G, and at the same time, per devices, reduce the energy you need to connect your device to the antenna. Now, that's the good news. But of course, there's a bad news, which is that you cannot have all in one. You have to choose if you want some big bandwidth, if you want to have some low latency, or if you want to have some multiple devices connected. And one of the key thing that is coming with 5G is the fact that you can, in fact, from one physical network, you can, through software, define several virtual type of networks, each of them having their specificities. And this is what is called the network slicing. Clearly, this is not possible to be done using 4G technologies. And in 5G, you're going to be able, along a highway, for example, to set one single hardware network. And with that single hardware network, you're going to be able to set one network for smartphones to have a wide bandwidth in order to watch videos, but low latency, for example. You can, with that only hardware network, also have a second virtual network to enable autonomous cars to drive through the highway where you need very low latency. And you can set through software a third layer of network where you will be connecting all of the devices to monitor the highway, to monitor the temperature, to monitor the signals along the way. And that requires a lot of devices, but does not need a very low latency, for example. So network slicing is something brought by 5G to virtually create several networks when in fact you only have one physical network. Now that you have understood everything that it's about within 5G, technically speaking, let's talk about what it means for you every day. And I will switch to Jérôme to give us a flavor of that.
Yeah, thanks, François. First of all, and following your points related to the features, the idea is to highlight the fact that the new features and technical features that François just explained are allowing us to create new usages, even if the first one that the first customers of 5G are currently seeing is that there is a massive increase of the broadband which is available for them. There was even some discussion around that and the usage for each individual. So that's typically a B2B impact, a B2C impact, sorry, that we see there. And as mentioned before, the fact that in average the speed of the broadband, the capacity to download will be 10 times bigger than 4G is effectively the first major impact that all new customers will see. The second point that is already in place and starting in quite a lot of countries, the capacity to deliver broadband and with the 5G technology, instead of being capable to deliver fiber connections to some homes or houses or buildings that are not easy to connect to a fixed network. 5G is definitely an answer. That's especially the case in some areas such as Northern America, where especially in the US, this usage is currently growing very fast, and that's also one of the reasons of the big development of 5G in North America. But again, these are the first impact, and we do believe, and we already started with our teams, with Axians teams in quite a lot of countries to see new usages that are rising. There we identified about 5 major usage, but indeed, we are not exhaustive saying so because we just need to pick up some examples. First one, François mentioned it, the very low latency, and also, that's very important, the very low level of errors in the 5G networks will allow the arrival, we don't know exactly when because there are quite a lot of stakeholders around that, but the arrival of the autonomous car and the capacity for those cars and the drivers to be fully guided by those new networks, thanks again to these new features of the 5G. Regarding industry, François mentioned it also before, we are also in an area where more and more we're going to see the capacity to use machines, for instance, in factories in a remote way, to be capable to control much more equipment that's the case currently. And we already saw some initiatives around that. Some of you may know what's the Internet of Things, IoT, as we used to say. But indeed, 5G will play a major role in this domain for the industry, for the factories, for manufacturing camps, and so on. Thanks again to the capacity to connect a lot of devices, as you mentioned it, because that's really also a major improvement of this new technology, and the capacity to deliver broadband, also in terms of indoor coverage, that will be a key asset for 5G. If we go to another topic which is also important for Vinci and all our ecosystem, the energy domain, where again we do believe that 5G will be clearly a differentiator in order to answer the new requirements, especially in the domain of the power grid, of the smart grid also. We know that those smart grids need more and more to have a dynamic, real-time balance between the production, and the usage, the demand. The architecture of the 5G network, thanks to, again, the feature that we described before, will be much more capable and much more flexible, and will reach these requirements for the energy consumption for both the producers but also the users. Another domain on which we do believe that 5G will clearly also improve the capacity and develop new services. That's the smart building, especially in the domain of maintenance. One of the good examples of that is that we may consider that the capacity to support a technician on site with a remote expert being located in an HQ or another location. Again, the 5G, thanks again to the indoor coverage also inside the building, will be clearly a key mean in order to provide the relevant information with augmented reality or virtual reality, pushing documents to support in real time the technicians when he's looking at maintenance operations on site. And again, another major topic, like for the industry, we do believe that the IoT in the buildings will be also considerably improved by the deployment of 5G networks. Last but not least, especially in this special period of crisis, and I think that's one also of the usage that is quite often mentioned in the news or on TV programs and so on. That's the healthcare. You've all seen already some remote surgeries done by someone in a country and the patient being located in another one. Of course, the deployment of those new solutions with all the characteristics that François highlighted just before, in terms of reliability, in terms of low latency, in terms of real-time capacity and broadband, will of course help the development of those new solutions in the domain of healthcare. Last point around that is also the capacity to monitor, as we said before, a lot of devices, and those devices can be a kind of tool for the patients to be monitored when they are looking in the hospitals, especially in period of crisis. It will improve the capacity of the teams in the hospital to monitor a lot of patients and take care of them relevantly.
Thank you, Jérôme. So I guess you got a flavor of everything that is coming up thanks to 5G that was not possible before. And that gives you an understanding of the current situation of the money which is being put into 5G. Just to give you a flavor, on this slide, you have the investments done by the carriers on the different technologies for the public network. So that's just a sample to give you how intense 5G is being the attention for some investments of these people. And on the far left-hand side, you have in light blue the investments on 4G, and at the bottom in dark blue you have the investments in public networks for 5G. And as you can see, 2 or 3 years before, most of the investments were for the 5G, and there were some remaining investments for the 2 and 3G, but nothing much for 5G. Now, if you go to the far right, what you can see is that in the coming 4 to 5 years, it's expected to be drastically changing, and as investments in the public networks for 2 and 3Gs are going to go to an end, investments, I'm not saying for the networks, but investments are going to be going to an end. 4G is slowly going to decrease in terms of investment as 5G is really going to become the predominant technology for the investments. And I can expect that by the end of the 2020s, you are going to have a start of the 6G coming up, taking once again here the place of the 5G. So for sure, in terms of its investment in the past, 5G has been ramping up fast, and in the future, it is expected to become the area where most of the investments are going to be done by the carriers in the future. And as of today, you have here a map of where the 5G is currently either launched, so starting to be implemented, or planned to be launched in the near future. And you can see clearly that the early adapter countries such as South Korea or North America or China are strongly into 5G, But now the current status, 5G is really starting to cover all continents with a deployment which is really going to go very fast, and many other countries are candidates in the near future to have some 5G. The current estimation is that about 100 million people are already connected through 5G devices, and in the coming 4 years, people say that they are expecting between 2 and 3 billion people to be connected through 5G mobile devices.